Welcome. In today's video, we'll be looking at how to solve a chess study. You will understand the concept of constraint. My name is Bharat Divyang. I'm from Zugzwang Academy, and I hope this video would be insightful. Let's begin. So this is the position. This is called a study. Now, a study is very similar to a puzzle, but it also has its differences. The study is meant more to understand the position at depth and not just find a quick answer. It's not a simple tactic, it requires more deeper thinking. So this particular video is for more intermediate and advanced level players. But nevertheless, what I want to focus on in this video is to look at the thought process behind the solution rather than the solution itself. So white has to win, white has to play and win. So what are the things that you need to do to solve this puzzle? You need to observe, you need to understand, and you need to calculate. And remember the cardinal truth of chess and fluid intelligence and everything that we do in Zugzwang. You need to develop the ability to see similarities between differences and differences between similarities. So with that in mind, let's get going. So first thing we need to do is observe. So what is it that we observe in this position? White has 2 pawns. The promotion of the f pawn, even though it's on the 6th rank and it's just 2 moves away from promoting, is not easy because of white having a knight and the king being very far away. If white loses the a2 pawn, black could promote. So there's a potential threat. So either the king or the bishop can stop the promotion. So bishop to d5 is one way that black would definitely want to be doing so that he can prevent the pawn from ever coming to f7, because black doesn't mind sacrificing the bishop for the pawn if he can prevent the promotion. Or the king captures the knight. So these are the 2 ways in which black could stop white from promoting and further the agenda. Now let's do the second thing, which is to understand what is it that we need to understand. So the strategy that white needs to implement here is that either white promotes the pawn and therefore he wins the game, or he exchanges the pawn for the bishop, as in he forces the bishop to exchange or sacrifice the bishop in exchange for the pawn. And therefore white would be left with a knight, and he can go and do the easy pickings of picking up the black pawns on a3 and a4, and eventually use a knight and a pawn and a king to promote it. Promote the a pawn, that is. So black is not going to give in. Bishop exchange needs to be forced. So remember, these are the 2 things that your opponent wants to do. Black wants to basically capture the knight, or he wants to bring the bishop to d5, one to prevent the pawn from ever coming to f7, at the same time attacking the a2 pawn, which is unsupported, and therefore if he ever gets to capture the a2 pawn, black has a chance of promoting himself. So your strategy of solving this puzzle is to say, stop my opponent from doing what he wants to do. So now that gives you the direction to say, we could calculate, we can go ahead and calculate. So let's calculate the first one. We know that black wants to move the bishop to d5. How to stop this? Knight to c7 is the only possible move. The king is too far away. He needs at least 2 moves to be able to control the d5 square. So the king can't do it, pawns can't do it. Knight is the only one, and the knight can either come to f6, which is stopped by his own pawn, or c7. And you might say, okay, I can move the knight to f7, but the king is going to capture it. Let's put a pin on that and we'll come back to it a little later. Let's take the next part of our calculation. We know that the knight is being under attack. The king wants to capture the knight. So how do I save the knight? Remember, to protect my pieces in chess, there is a framework that we use in Zugzwang called kebs. Kill, escape, block, support. These are the 4 ways in which you can protect your pieces. You can kill the attacker. In this case, that can't be done because you can't kill the king. You can escape. Of course, you can move the knight away from where it is to some other square. That would be escape. Block is where you block the attack. It works in long range pieces, but not in the case of a king attack, because the king attacks the pieces that's adjacent to it and nobody can block a piece that's being attacked by the king. You can support it. In this case, you can push the pawn to support it. Now, the support doesn't work. The reason for that is all king has to do is move to e7, attack the pawn, and control f8. The moment the king controls f8, even though the knight could potentially protect the pawn, the fact that he's controlling f8 means that promotion is going to become very, very hard. And it won't support. You can't save the pawn eventually because the bishop would also come to d5 and start attacking. Escape to g7 and d6 doesn't help either because the bishop would again come to d5 and control the f7 square. So what is left has to be the answer. That's the power of logic and deduction. However improbable it is, that could be the answer. Now let's put things together. Let's finalize on what our move is going to be. And here our mantra of similarities between differences and differences between similarities is going to come in handy. So we want to prevent bd5, we want to save the knight. These are the 2 things that is our goal. To prevent bd5, knight c7 is the only way, as we observed it. To prevent the knight from being captured, I can either move the pawn to f7, or I can move the knight to g7 or d6, or I can move the knight to c7. Now if you see, the only thing that's common between the 2 is knight c7, and therefore the answer is going to look like knight c7. However, you just can't finalize it based on this. You would still want to do a deeper calculation and see what is going to happen with knight c7. But at least you have a candidate to consider, a very strong candidate, and highly improbable candidate because knight f7 looks like a knight c7 looks like a sacrifice, but it's not. So here's where we want to stop the study. I'm not going to be giving the solution, but I want you to think about the solution, and we will do another video where we would actually go deeper into the solution. So the next step is to extend this method. We know knight c7 is the first move. Can you deduce black's response? Can you calculate the same way we calculated that the first move has to be knight c7? Can you calculate what would be black's response here? I want you to understand constraints. If your opponent wants something and you prevent it, you're creating a constraint. That's the language of constraint. Constraint is basically restriction. It's like a boundary. It's like stopping something, stopping a degree of freedom. And finally, from this study, I want you to remember one thing. Chess is a zero-sum game. Which means if you stop your opponent from doing something that will be good for him, turns out it's good for you. That's the nature of the beast here. Okay, your next step is take the same position. You know knight c7 is the first move. Try and calculate your next step. Now, by this time, you already understand that study is different from puzzle in that study could definitely require you to do a lot more calculation, and you just can't rely on pattern recognition the way you would do for puzzles, because puzzles can be solved by just recognizing tactical patterns and be able to find the answer. But studies need deeper calculation. So if you want to get good at chess, calculation is one of the biggest dimensions that you need to conquer. Studies are a wonderful way to do that. All the best, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.